My twin brother called me from inside a wardrobe. He was whispering so quietly that I had to press the phone against my ear until the plastic hurt, straining to catch each word over the sound of laughter echoing from somewhere else in his house. Not happy laughter. The kind of laughter that belongs to people who know someone else is suffering. When I finally understood what he was telling me, I did not cry. I did not pace the room. I did not shout. I sat completely still for about 30 seconds, the way I used to sit in observation posts in the mountains of Kosovo, cataloging everything I needed to know before I decided what to do next. Then I made him a promise, and I have never broken a promise in my life. My name is Nikolai Brenner. I am 64 years old, and I live alone in a stone farmhouse outside Salzburg, Austria, on a property that backs against a hillside of old spruce trees. The house is worth considerably more than it looks, which suits me perfectly, because I have always preferred that the full picture of my life remain hidden from casual observation. For 28 years, I worked as a private security consultant, which is what people say when they do not want to say that they spent nearly 3 decades in highly classified operational environments, managing risks that governments could not officially acknowledge. I worked in the Balkans during the worst years. I worked in eastern Ukraine before the world was paying attention. I worked in Libya when the country was dissolving like a sugar cube in warm water. I was never decorated publicly. I was never mentioned in any report. That was the arrangement, and I respected it. I retired 6 years ago with money that I keep in 4 different accounts across 3 different jurisdictions, a property portfolio that generates a quiet income, and a reputation in certain circles that I have been very careful to keep absolutely invisible. My twin brother's name is Lucas. We were born in Vienna on the same morning in February, 38 minutes apart, in a hospital that no longer exists. Our mother was a school teacher from Graz, and our father was a clockmaker. A man of extraordinary patience and very gentle hands who believed that precision was a form of love. We were identical in every physical way that science can measure. Same height, same bone structure. Same gray-green eyes that look blue in photographs, same jawline, same hands. When we were boys, our mother could only tell us apart because Lucas always tilted his head slightly to the left when he was thinking, and I always stood completely straight. The habit stayed with us into adulthood. Lucas became a furniture restorer, beautiful, careful work. He took broken things and brought them back to what they had been. It suited him entirely because Lucas was the kind of man who believed that most broken things were worth saving. He settled in Lyon, in the south of France, married a woman named Isabelle Marchetti, and spent 22 years building what he thought was a life. What he was actually building, though, he could not see it from inside. It was a prison. I was cleaning the lens of my Leica camera when the call came. I had been photographing the mountains that morning, a hobby I had taken up in retirement because it required the kind of focused attention that my nervous system needed in order to feel normal, and my phone was face down on the kitchen table. When I flipped it over and saw Lucas's name, I answered immediately. He never called in the evening unless something was wrong. The connection was poor. I could hear static, and then I could hear his breathing, shallow and uneven, the breathing of a man trying very hard not to make any sound at all. "Lucas," I said, "where are you?" A long pause. Then very quietly, "I'm in the wardrobe in the spare room." I heard laughter below. Someone was celebrating something. I could hear music, a television turned up loud, the clink of glasses. "Are you hurt?" The silence that followed was longer than any silence has the right to be between brothers. "She poured boiling water on my hand last week," he said finally. "She said it was an accident, but her daughter was watching when it happened, and her daughter smiled." I set the camera down on the table. I looked at my hands. The hands of a man who had spent 3 decades making sure that dangerous people understood that there were consequences for the choices they made. I looked out through the window at the mountains. The spruce trees were perfectly still in the windless evening air. "How long?" I asked him. "How long has it been like this?" He told me. He told me in small pieces, pausing when the laughter got louder, Homerton stairs, his voice dropping to almost nothing whenever he heard a footstep. He told me about the last 5 years since his wife Isabelle had brought her son-in-law, Thierry Lemaire, into the house under the pretext of helping manage the furniture workshop that Lucas had built from nothing. Thierry was 20 years younger than Isabelle, a man who presented himself as a property developer, but who had, as far as Lucas could determine, never actually developed anything except an elaborate series of schemes to extract money from people who trusted him. Thierry had married Isabelle's daughter Celeste 2 years earlier, and within 6 months of the wedding, He and Celeste and Isabel had effectively taken control of Lucas's household, his finances, his business, and what remained of his sense of himself as a human being. The workshop, Lucas said. Thierry has been signing my name on contracts. He sold 2 of the restorations I spent 8 months on. He told the clients they were from a different craftsman and pocketed the full payment. He has a notary friend. I think they are planning to transfer the deed to the workshop property. He showed me a paper last month. He said I needed to sign it for tax purposes. I didn't sign it, and he broke 2 of my fingers. He said it was a door. Isabel told the doctor it was a door. I stood up from the table. What do you want me to do? I said. Tell me exactly what you want. Another long silence, and in it I could hear everything that 22 years of diminishment will do to a man's voice. I could hear the erosion of his certainty, that he had the right to ask for anything at all. When he spoke again, his voice was the voice of someone who has nearly forgotten his own name. I just want to be myself again, Nikolai, he said. I just want to be a person again. I told him to go to the back garden out through the kitchen without taking anything. I told him to walk to the railway station 2 kilometers away and wait inside the arrivals hall, not the departures hall, because people looking for a missing person always watch departures first. I told him to buy a coffee and sit with it, and not speak to anyone, and not use his phone for anything except to tell me when he arrived. I told him I would be there before morning. He made one small sound that I cannot describe to you accurately. It was the sound of a person who has been told they are allowed to breathe again. I hung up, walked to my bedroom and stood at the wardrobe for a moment. I did not open the left side where I keep my good things. The dark wool suits, the shirts from the tailor in Vienna, the boots I had made in Budapest 4 years ago. I opened the right side, the shelf at the back. Behind 2 old sweaters there was a metal box, the kind with a combination lock that you could find in any hardware shop, and that for exactly that reason, no one ever looks at twice. I opened it and took out what I needed, a small camera disguised as a shirt button, a voice-activated recording device no bigger than a coin, a prepaid phone I refreshed every 6 months, and my emergency identification documents, which I'm not going to describe in any further detail, except to say that they were genuine documents, not forgeries, obtained through channels that required a great deal of patience and a great deal of money. I packed a canvas bag, not a suitcase. I took old clothes, the kind of clothes that had no particular character, worn corduroy trousers, a gray wool jumper with a small tear at the elbow, a pair of walking shoes that had been resoled twice. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and began the process I had not needed to perform in 6 years. I lowered my shoulders. I rounded them slightly forward. I tilted my head a fraction to the left, mimicking the one physical habit that had always distinguished my brother from me. Then I practiced his walk. Lucas walks with his weight slightly back on his heels, a man who is always bracing himself slightly, always expecting the next thing to be slightly unpleasant. I walked up and down the hallway 3 times until the movement was automatic. I drove my old Volvo, not the Land Cruiser, because the Land Cruiser draws attention, and the Volvo disappears into every road in Central Europe like a stone dropping into water. I drove through the night. The Brenner Pass at 2 in the morning is one of the most beautiful and lonely places in the world, the mountains so enormous and so quiet that the universe seems to clarify itself. I drove through northern Italy and into France, and arrived at the railway station in Lyon at 4:45 in the morning. The arrivals hall was nearly empty. A cleaner was pushing a cart across the marble floor. A young couple was asleep on a bench under a backpack, and in the far corner near the vending machines my brother was sitting with a paper coffee cup held in both hands, looking at the floor. I sat down beside him. He didn't look at me for a long time. Then he turned and I saw his face properly for the first time in a year, and it was everything I had feared and more. His left hand was wrapped in dirty bandaging, 2 fingers splinted with what looked like lollipop sticks and surgical tape, the improvised work of a man with no access to a doctor he could trust. His right eye had the yellowish remnant of a bruise that was 2 or 3 weeks old. He had lost weight that someone his age and build could not afford to lose. He looked diminished, not just physically, but in some fundamental way that I knew from experience was the hardest kind of damage to undo. When the body loses its sense of occupying space in the world with any right to be there, it does not recover quickly. We sat in silence for several minutes. He smelled of wood varnish and something I did not want to identify. I need you to go somewhere very comfortable and very quiet, I told him. I have already arranged it. There is a small hotel in Annecy on the lake. I have paid for 10 days under my name. The room has a view of the water. There is a good restaurant. I want you to eat everything on the menu. I want you to sleep until your body decides to wake up by itself. I want you to speak to no one about anything important. He looked at me then. At my face, which was his face. You are going to go back, he said. It was not a question. I reached into the canvas bag and took out the spare clothes I had brought, which were my clothes, not his. Get changed, I said. In the bathroom. Leave what you are wearing for me. He didn't argue. He was gone for 10 minutes, and when he came back he was wearing a clean dark jumper and good wool trousers, and he already looked slightly more like a person. He handed me the clothes he had been wearing, a thin sweater with a fraying collar, work trousers that had been mended at one knee with a different fabric, shoes with the sole beginning to peel away from the upper on the left foot. I held them for a moment. The weight of a man's dignity stripped away over years of deliberate erosion can be surprisingly physical. You can feel it. I changed in the bathroom. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror above the sink. I was wearing my brother's exhaustion. I was wearing the evidence of what they had done to him. I looked exactly like a man who had been slowly, methodically destroyed and did not know how to find his way back. Good. That was what I needed them to see. Before he left, I sat with Lucas for another hour and made him tell me everything. Not just the events, but the details. The layout of the house, which rooms had locks, which windows could be opened, where Isabel kept the household documents, what kind of car Thierry drove, where the workshop keys were stored, who the notary was, the name of the law firm Thierry had been using. The name of the property developer who had apparently been in conversation with Thierry about the workshop land, and the name and number of the one person Lucas still trusted, his oldest friend, a man named Henri Beaumont, a retired judge who lived 20 minutes outside Lyon and who didn't know yet quite how serious things had become. Write Henri's number down for me, I said. He wrote it on a paper serviette from the coffee stand, his two splinted fingers making the writing awkward and large. Does Isabel have any idea that you called me? I asked. He shook his head. She took my phone away 3 months ago. This phone belonged to one of the workshop apprentices. He gave it to me last week without telling Isabel. Good. I held up my own phone. Call me from this number every evening at 8 o'clock. If I do not answer, wait 30 minutes and call again. If I still do not answer, call Henri Beaumont and tell him everything. He nodded. I put him in a taxi to the train station and watched it pull away. Then I got back into the Volvo and drove to the house. It was a good house. I could see why a man like Thierry Lemaire had identified it as worth acquiring. It was a tall, narrow townhouse in the Presqu'île district, the peninsula between the Rhône and the Saône rivers, the old bones of Lyon that had been accumulating beauty and value for 4 centuries. The building had a worn limestone facade and tall green shutters, and a heavy wooden door with an iron knocker shaped like a lion's head. The workshop was in a converted ground floor space that had its own entrance through an archway at the side of the building. I could smell wood stain and linseed oil from the street. The building was worth probably 2.5 million euros by itself. The workshop, according to what Lucas had pieced together, sat on land that a commercial developer had been quietly pursuing for 3 years as a critical access point for a planned mixed-use renovation of an adjacent block. Without the workshop's parcel, the whole development could not proceed, which meant that the land, which Lucas owned and which Thierry was now attempting to transfer through fraudulent document filing, was worth considerably more to the right buyer than its official valuation suggested. I sat in the Volvo across the street for 40 minutes watching. I saw a light on the 2nd floor. I saw a window open on the 3rd and a hand reach out to tap ash from a cigarette. Thierry. I saw the shadow of someone moving through the ground floor kitchen at the back of the building. I noted the layout matched it against what Lucas had described and confirmed the entry point. I got out of the car. I walked to the side archway, found the workshop key on the hook inside the small wooden cabinet bolted to the wall where Lucas had said it would be, and let myself into the workshop. I stood in the dark for a moment. It smelled like my brother's entire adult life, centuries of carefully dissolved lacquer, the mineral sharpness of linseed oil. Oak shavings curled on the floor beneath the workbench like sleeping animals. There were 3 pieces in various stages of restoration: a Biedermeier writing desk with one drawer missing a marquetry armoire whose veneer was lifting along one side, and what appeared to be an 18th century provincial armchair in dire need of new webbing. My brother was extraordinarily good at his work. I had always known this, but standing among the things he was tending in secret while the people above him ate and drank and planned to take everything he had ever built, I felt something move in me that I had learned a long time ago to keep very carefully under control. I breathed slowly for a moment and let it settle back to where it needed to be. Then I went upstairs. I let myself in through the internal door between the workshop and the main house. The kitchen was dark and empty, but the remnants of an elaborate dinner were still on the table. 3 plates, wine glasses, an empty bottle of something that appeared to be reasonably expensive. I noted the dog bowl on the floor beside the back door. There was no dog. I knew without needing to be told what the bowl was for. I sat down at the kitchen table in the dark and waited. I did not have to wait long. At 6:30 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, confident footsteps, the footsteps of a man who has never had cause to move quietly through a space because every space he occupies has already been made entirely his. The kitchen light came on. Thierry Lemaire was standing at the doorway in an expensive bathrobe holding a phone, looking at the screen with the concentrated frown of a man reading something that displeases him only mildly. He was 37 years old, lean and broad-shouldered in the way of men who use expensive gym memberships as a personality trait, with a precise 3-day stubble that I could tell required more maintenance than actual 3-day stubble is supposed to require. He had the face of a man who had learned at an early age that charm was an instrument of extraction rather than connection, and who had consequently never felt the need to develop any other tool. He looked up and saw me at the table. He stopped. He looked at me for a moment, with the particular expression of a man who has trained himself never to show surprise because he believes surprise implies vulnerability. "What are you doing up?" he said. His French was Parisian, with a deliberate sharpness to it, the accent of someone who had originally come from somewhere else and had worked hard to overwrite it. "Could not sleep," I said. I kept my voice slightly flat, slightly subdued, the voice Lucas had described to me, the voice of a man who has learned to take up as little space as possible. I looked at the floor. I let my shoulders round. Thierry made a sound that was not quite a laugh and moved to the expensive Italian espresso machine on the counter. He did not offer to make me one. He stood with his back to me and made his coffee, and I watched the back of his head and noted 3 things: the rigidity of his neck, the slight tension in his right shoulder, and the angle at which he kept his body subtly turned so that he could see me in his peripheral vision without appearing to look. A man who was used to managing threats he didn't acknowledge. "I spoke to Moreau yesterday," he said, still not turning around. "He wants the paperwork signed before the end of the month." I told him that would not be a problem. Moreau was the property developer. I had found his name in the files Lucas had described in the locked drawer in the downstairs office files. He had only been able to see once briefly when Thierry had left the key in the lock by mistake. Lucas had photographed 2 pages with the apprentice's phone before replacing everything exactly as he had found it. I did not say anything. I let the silence sit between us until it became slightly uncomfortable for him. I had found in my career that most people, particularly people who rely on the control of narrative to maintain their position, cannot tolerate silence longer than approximately 8 seconds before they fill it. Thierry lasted 6. "The renovation is going to be significant," he said, turning now and leaning against the counter with his coffee. "This whole block. They are talking about 14 units above the commercial space. Moreau says the return on the investment within 5 years will be extraordinary." He looked at me over the rim of his cup with that specific expression of studied generosity that I recognized as the last stage before the essay. "You should be proud, Lucas. Your workshop made all of this possible. Without this property, the whole thing collapses." He paused. "We want to make sure you are taken care of. Isabel and I have talked about it. We are thinking of a small allowance. Something regular, so you do not have to worry about the day-to-day." "An allowance," I said. I looked at my hands, at the bandaging on my left hand, the 2 splinted fingers. "Generous, yes," he said. His tone had the warmth of a reptile warming itself on a stone. "Very," I said quietly. He smiled. "I will have the notary's papers ready for you to look at by Wednesday," he said. "It is straightforward. A transfer of the operational interest in the workshop property to the development consortium. Very clean. You keep the building itself, technically speaking. We just need the land registered separately for the development access." What Lucas would have done at this point, from everything he had described to me, was nod and say he needed to think about it, and then go back downstairs to the basement room and lie on the camp bed they had put there for him after they gave his bedroom to Celeste and Thierry, and think about how impossible his situation was. I did not do that. I looked at Thierry with the kind of stillness that is quite different from the stillness of a defeated man, and I said very calmly, "Tell me what you think the land is worth, Thierry." Something shifted in his face. Not much. A fraction of a degree of reassessment. "The valuation is in the documents," he said. "The market rate." "I would like your estimate," I said. He looked at me for a moment longer. You know what it's worth, he said. No, I said, I want to hear you say it. The silence lasted longer this time. He was recalibrating this man. He was looking at the face of someone he thought he had comprehensively broken and finding in the geography of that face something that did not correspond to his assessment. Lucas, he said finally, and his voice had dropped half a register. Have you been talking to someone? I stood up. I was careful to stand up slowly the way Lucas would stand with the slight hesitation of a man whose joints remember pain. I walked to the coffee machine and made myself an espresso, taking the last remaining cup from the cabinet. I turned around and looked at him. Get dressed, I said. I want to see the papers. He stared at me. Wednesday, he said. Today, I said. He was very quiet for a moment. Then he put his cup down on the counter and walked out of the kitchen. I listened to his footsteps go up the stairs. I held my espresso cup in both hands and drank half of it. I reached into my collar and pressed the record button on the camera button. I had been recording since I sat down at the kitchen table, everything Thierry had said about the land. The development, the papers, the allowance was already captured, but I needed more. I needed him to be specific, and I needed witnesses, and I needed him to do something foolish enough to make the legal case absolutely unambiguous. He was going to give me all of that. I simply had to be patient. Isabel came down at 7:30. She was a handsome woman, perhaps 60 years old, with the kind of face that had once been beautiful in a severe architectural way, and had not lost that quality so much as it had redistributed it into an expression of permanent control. She had very dark eyes, and she wore her silver hair pulled back in a way that suggested she wanted nothing to do with softness. She was wearing a structured linen jacket even first thing in the morning, as if she had learned at some point that the appearance of preparedness was itself a form of weapon. She stopped when she saw me sitting at the kitchen table. You are up early, she said. I made coffee, I said. I hope that is acceptable. Something moved behind her eyes, a quick, sharp reassessment, the same thing I had seen in Thierry, but faster, more practiced. She had been doing this longer. She walked to the counter and made herself coffee without speaking. Then she sat down at the table, not across from me, but at the end at the head, the position she always occupied to make the spatial point about hierarchy. She looked at my bandaged hand. How is your hand? She asked. There was no warmth in the question. It was a monitoring inquiry. It hurts, I said. You should be more careful around the workshop, she said. Yes, I said. Thierry tells me you want to look at the papers today. I do. She regarded me for a long time without speaking. Then she said quietly and very precisely the way someone speaks when they are delivering a message they want received without any ambiguity. Lucas, I want you to understand something. Thierry has been very patient with you. He has given you time to adjust to this new arrangement. He has been reasonable. He has not pushed. She paused. But the developer's window is closing. If we do not have the transfer filed by the end of this month, the entire project falls through and we lose the opportunity entirely. She set her cup down. I need you to cooperate. I need you to sign what needs to be signed, and I need you to do it without making things difficult. She looked at my hand again. I would hate for there to be any further accidents. I looked at her. I let the silence run for exactly as long as it needed to run. What did you think would happen, Isabel? I said. She froze. I said it quietly, the same quiet voice, the same slightly rounded posture, but with something underneath it that I could see she was not prepared for. Not anger, not desperation, nothing she could dismiss or manage. Something cooler than that. Excuse me, she said. Did you think about what would happen after I said, after you got the signature, after the development went through, after Thierry had the money? Did you think about what happened to you in that particular version of events? Her face did not change, but something went very still behind her eyes. I think you should have a glass of water, she said. You seem confused. I'm not confused, I said. I've been confused for a long time. I'm not confused now. At that moment, Celeste came down. Celeste was 29, Isabel's daughter, Thierry's wife, a young woman of the kind whose beauty had arrived early and catastrophically and had consequently left her with very little reason to develop anything else. She had her mother's dark eyes, but none of the steel behind them, just the appetites without the architecture. She came into the kitchen in silk pajamas, looked at me without interest, and opened the refrigerator. Is there brioche? She asked no one in particular. I said, Celeste, your husband is planning to file for divorce the moment the property transfer is complete. He has already prepared the papers. The refrigerator door swung slowly on its hinge. Celeste turned around and looked at me with the expression of someone who has just heard a sound in a room they thought was empty. What did you say? She said. I said it again clearly. Isabel stood up very fast. "That is enough," she said. Her voice had taken on a quality I recognized, the sharp edge of a person whose plan is suddenly developing structural faults. "Where did you hear that?" "He told me," I said, "last night." "He told you," she repeated. She looked at me with a compound expression of disbelief, and something I could see was rapidly becoming fear, not of me exactly, but of what it meant if things were not as stable as she had believed them to be. "You are making this up," Celeste said, but her voice had gone thin. "I am not," I said. "He plans to take his share of the development proceeds and leave for Portugal. He has a studio apartment already rented. He showed me a photograph once. He said it was a friend's place. It is not a friend's place." I said this last part because Lucas had found a printed photograph in a jacket of Thierry's that had been left in the workshop. A small apartment interior with Lisbon tiling visible through a window. He had mentioned it to me twice, each time, unable to understand fully what it meant. I had understood immediately. Celeste looked at her mother. "Maman," she said. Isabel's jaw was working very slightly, the way jaws work when someone is compressing a great number of things they want to say. Thierry came back into the kitchen at that precise moment. He had changed into clothes that were too careful for a weekday morning, too assembled the clothes of a man who had decided he needed the armor of appearance. He was carrying a manila folder, the papers presumably, and he stopped in the doorway when he saw the atmosphere. He looked at Isabel. He looked at Celeste. He looked at me. "What is going on?" he said. "I told them about Portugal," I said. The kitchen was very quiet. Thierry looked at me for a long moment with an expression that had abandoned all pretense of the studied warmth he normally maintained. What looked back at me now was something much simpler and considerably more honest, the face of a person who has identified a problem and is deciding what to do about it. "Lucas," he said carefully, "you need to calm down." "I am calm," I said. "I am extremely calm." "Where did you hear about Portugal?" he said. His voice was controlled, but underneath it, there was a quality I recognized from many years of working with and against people who resorted to physical solutions when verbal ones failed. He was measuring the distance between himself and the knife block on the counter. I noted this without moving. "You told me yourself," I said. 2 weeks ago, you had been drinking. You said Portugal was warm and had good fish." This was partially true. Lucas had mentioned to me that Thierry often talked vaguely and expansively when he had been drinking, and that on one occasion he had made some reference to a different life, somewhere warmer. I was extrapolating, but with the confidence of someone who knows they are extrapolating in the right direction. Thierry set the folder down on the counter. He walked into the kitchen with deliberate calm, moving to stand closer to me than was necessary. It was a territorial assertion. He was a large man, and he used size as language. "You are confused," he said. "You are misremembering things again. This is not the first time. Isabel and I have discussed it with Dr. Faure. He thinks your memory lapses are becoming a serious concern. He thinks perhaps a residential placement might be the most compassionate option." Dr. Faure. Lucas had told me about him. A physician who had been brought to the house on 2 occasions by Isabel and who had spent a combined total of approximately 40 minutes examining my brother. Mostly Lucas suspected because Isabel was a paying client of Faure's private clinic. Lucas had not signed any forms. He had not consented to anything. But the mere invocation of a medical opinion as leverage was precise and deliberate. It was the mechanism by which they planned to have him declared incompetent if he continued to resist the property transfer. I looked up at Thierry. He was standing very close. I could smell his aftershave, something cedar-based and expensive. I looked at the manila folder on the counter. "Bring me the papers," I said. He looked down at me for a long moment. Then a slight smile moved across his face, a smile I had seen in various configurations on various faces in various difficult places in the world, the smile of a person who has reassured himself that the threat is not real. He turned to get the folder. The moment he turned, I moved. I did not hit him. I want to be absolutely clear about this. I got out of the chair, and I moved to the counter, and I took the manila folder before his hand reached it. I stepped back to the table and opened it and read the first page in approximately 15 seconds, which was all I needed to read to confirm what Lucas had described. It was a transfer deed for the workshop land, registered separately from the building structure in a way that was designed to appear legally innocuous while being operationally catastrophic. It was in the language of the document described as an administrative restructuring of the property asset for tax optimization purposes, the actual effect, which required 3 paragraphs to navigate to, and which a non-specialist would almost certainly miss on a first reading, was a complete transfer of ownership of the land parcel to a holding company registered in Luxembourg, whose beneficial ownership was obscured behind 2 layers of corporate structure. The holding company, I was virtually certain, ultimately pointed to Thierry. I placed the folder back on the counter. I held up my phone and photographed the first page, the second page, the third page, and the signature page. "What are you doing?" Thierry said. His voice had sharpened. I put my phone in my pocket. I looked at him. "I'm sending these to a lawyer," I said. He moved quickly. He was fast for his size, and he was angry now, the controlled exterior cracking finely in the way that control always eventually cracks under the pressure of the unexpected. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and reached for my arm. His hand closed around my wrist, the right wrist hard with the specific grip of a man who is accustomed to using grip as communication. "That is enough," he said. "You are going to sit down, and you are going to sign the papers, and you are going to stop this immediately." He squeezed, deliberately, a warning in the vocabulary of pain. "You hear me, old man?" I looked at his hand on my wrist. I looked at it for a moment. Then I turned my wrist in a specific motion that any person with 3 years of close-quarters training can perform automatically, and which results in the complete inversion of the power relationship in a wrist grip with an efficiency that never fails to surprise people who have never encountered it. His fingers came free. I had his right hand turned outward at the wrist with his elbow locked before he had time to process that anything had changed. I applied approximately 40% of the available pressure to the joint. He made a sound and bent forward. "Isabel," I said, without looking away from Thierry. "Call your lawyer. Not your lawyer, a real one who works for you and not for the man whose hand I'm currently holding." Isabel was standing completely still by the kitchen door. Celeste was still holding the refrigerator door, one hand pressed against the metal, her face a map of an entirely redrawn understanding of what was happening in her marriage. I released Thierry's hand. He stumbled back against the counter, holding his wrist, his face cycling through surprise and pain and anger and something that was approaching slowly, the beginning of fear. "Who are you?" he said. His voice was entirely different now. The performance had fallen away completely. "I am Lucas Brenner," I said. "I've always been Lucas Brenner. I just stopped being afraid of you." He looked at my face with an intensity that told me he was running through everything he knew about Lucas and finding that the current data did not map onto the existing file. He was a smart enough man to know when something fundamentally had changed, even if he could not yet articulate what it was. I picked up the manila folder and walked out of the kitchen. I went downstairs to the basement room. I sat on the camp bed, the narrow frame with the thin mattress that they had put in the basement after they moved Celeste and Thierry into the master bedroom and Isabel into the second room, and left Lucas with this. I sat there for a moment, looking at the objects in the room. A wooden crate serving as a bedside table, a single lamp with a bare bulb, a small mirror propped against the wall, the condensation on the cold stone. I thought about my brother sitting in this room for years, and I let myself feel that for exactly as long as was necessary to make sure I never lost sight of what I was here to do. Then I put it away and took out the prepaid phone and called Henri Beaumont. Henri Beaumont had been a judge of the Lyon Commercial Court for 22 years before his retirement. He was 71 years old, a large, slow-moving man who had the particular quality of absolute stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades making irreversible decisions. Lucas had known him since they were both 18 years old. He was the person Lucas had called once. 2 years ago, when he first began to understand what Thierry was doing, and Henri had listened and then said very carefully that he would need documentary evidence before he could help, and that he trusted Lucas would find a way to get it. Henri answered on the second ring. "This is Nicolas," I said, "Lucas's brother. He knows I'm calling you. He gave me your number." A pause of exactly the length it takes a careful man to recalibrate. "I see," Henri said. "I need a lawyer who specializes in property fraud and a private notary who can be trusted to examine documents on short notice. I also need someone who can submit a request to the registration authority to put a temporary hold on any pending transfers of the workshop property pending investigation. I have photographic evidence of fraudulent documentation and a recorded confession from the person responsible. I also need, and this is important, a medical professional independent of Dr. Faur who can examine my brother and provide a formal written assessment of his competency. Because there is an attempt underway to have him declared incompetent, and I want that avenue closed before it can be opened." Henri was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Where are you?" "In the house," I said. "Does Thierry Lemaire know you are there?" "He has some idea," I said. Another pause. "Henri said I will make 3 calls. Give me 2 hours. Will you be safe until then?" I looked around the basement room. I looked at the dog bowl on the floor above me. I looked at my brother's 2-meter kingdom of damp stone and bare bulb. "I will be fine," I said. I spent the next 2 hours being very quiet and very present. I repaired the broken drawer on the Biedermeier desk in the workshop. I used the correct tools, the right grade of oak, the proper hide glue that Lucas had mixed and left in the covered pot by the workbench. I didn't hurry. I did the work the way he would have done it carefully, with the understanding that craftsmanship is a conversation between the maker and the materials, and that you cannot rush it without breaking something in the relationship. When the drawer was fitting cleanly and the glue had set enough to hold, I moved to the marquetry armoire and spent 40 minutes working on the lifting veneer with a small palette knife and fresh adhesive, pressing and clamping each section in turn. The work was meditative in the way that all truly skilled work is meditative. It required the kind of attention that does not leave room for anything else. At 10 o'clock, Thierry came down to the workshop. He was alone. He had changed his clothes again this time to something more casual, a more vulnerable presentation, a calculated softening. He stood in the doorway of the workshop and watched me work for a moment. I did not look up. "We should talk," he said. I applied pressure to the clamped veneer section. "We are talking," I said. He came in and sat on the old stool beside the workbench, the stool Lucas used when he was eating lunch between restorations. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor in the manner of a man preparing to be reasonable at you. "Look," he said, "I understand that things have become difficult. I think we have both handled some situations badly." He glanced at the bandaging on my hand. "I want to move forward differently. I think there is a version of this arrangement that works for everyone." "The property transfer," I said. "The development is going to happen regardless," he said. "The question is whether your family is positioned to benefit from it or not. Right now, the way things are structured, the developer is going to find access through the adjacent property eventually. It will take longer and cost more. They will do it. And when they do, your workshop is worth considerably less because it has lost its leverage." He spread his hands, the gesture of someone revealing the generous truth. "I am giving you an opportunity, Lucas, to be ahead of this rather than behind it." I pressed the final clamp into position on the veneer and wiped the excess adhesive from the joint. I looked at my hands, the one with the splinted fingers. The work was harder with the damaged hand. "What is the actual value?" I said. "Not the valuation in your papers, the real value." He hesitated for approximately 2 seconds. "Somewhere between 3 and 4 million euros, he said. "The precise figure depends on the development authorization and the final footprint agreement." "And what were you offering me?" "A fair market valuation plus an annual stipend." His eyes were calculating the distance between what I knew and what he thought he could still manage. "What is the market valuation in your papers?" 380,000. I sat with that number for a moment. The gap between those two figures was the gap between my brother's life and the life they had planned to give him. It was the gap between a decent old age and a dog bowl on the kitchen floor. I looked at Thierry. "I said I recorded everything you said yesterday evening in the living room. I have it on 2 separate devices and it has already been sent to a third party." He went very still. "And this morning in the kitchen I said, the offer of an allowance, the reference to the developer's timeline, the implied threat." He looked at me with a stripped expression, a face from which everything presentational had finally been removed. What was left was not pleasant. "That is not admissible," he said. "Recording without consent in France." I smiled for the first time. The smile moved my face in a way that I could tell he registered as unfamiliar. "Tell that to the Bar Association Disciplinary Committee when they investigate the notary," I said. "Tell it to the registration authority when they examine the fraudulent filing structure. Tell it to the court when they are weighing the cumulative weight of evidence. The recording may not be admissible in a criminal proceeding. It will be very useful in every other context." He stood up. He looked at me for a long moment. "You are not Lucas," he said. I looked at him. "What?" He took a half step back, his eyes moving over my face with a sudden raking focus. "You walk differently," he said. "You sit differently. He has a habit. When he is thinking, he tilts his head. He always tilts his head to the left. You do not do it. I have been watching you since this morning and you have not done it once." I stood up. I looked at him across the workbench. I was exactly his height. I was wearing his brother's clothes and his brother's broken hand. But I was not his brother, and he had just understood that. "Who are you?" he said again, and this time the question was entirely serious. "My name is Nikolai Brenner," I said. "I'm a private security consultant. I'm Lucas's twin brother. I've been collecting evidence inside your house for the last 24 hours. I have a lawyer, a notary, and a retired judge currently preparing the documentation to file an injunction on the property transfer and a referral to the Financial Crimes Unit. I also have enough of a recorded confession to make the next several years of your life extremely uncomfortable, legally and professionally." He was breathing carefully. His hands were at his sides. "I have 3 questions for you. You are going to answer them all. The answers will determine what the next stage looks like, if you cooperate fully. I will discuss with my brother whether the settlement can be handled privately. If you do not cooperate, every piece of evidence I have goes to the public prosecutor, to the property registry, to the Bar Association, with respect to your notary, to the developer's board of directors, and to the business press. I know 2 journalists in Lyon who cover commercial fraud. I have their numbers in my phone." He was very quiet. His chest was moving fast, but he was controlling it. "You came in here to destroy us," he said. "No," I said. "I came here to give my brother his life back. Whether or not you are destroyed is mostly up to you. Now, first question, the holding company in Luxembourg. Who are the other beneficial owners besides yourself?" The kitchen above us was silent. Somewhere outside, a delivery van was reversing with a persistent electronic beep. Thierry Lemaire looked at me for a long time, and I looked back, and the calculation behind his eyes was visible and complicated, and ultimately, as calculations of this kind tend to be when all the variables have been correctly identified and the person doing the calculating is honest enough to accept the result, it resolved itself in the correct direction. "My business partner," he said, "a man named Grégoire Auster. He is a licensed real estate agent in Villeurbanne. He handled the initial approach to Moreau." Second question, the notary. Is he aware that the documents are fraudulent? "He is aware that the beneficial ownership structure is obscured," Thierry said. "He was paid 8,000 euros for his participation." I photographed the clamp configuration on the armoire as a reflex habit while processing this. Third question, Isabelle. Does she know the full amount? Does she know it is 4 million and not the market valuation? He looked at the floor. "She knows the actual figure," he said. "We told Lucas it was market value, but Isabelle knows the full amount. We had an agreement. She was to receive 400,000. I put the phone down. I looked at the restored drawer on the Biedermeier desk. Lucas had done beautiful work on it. "Thank you," I said. "That was helpful." I called Henri. I told him what I had. He was quiet in the way of a man doing mental arithmetic on a very large set of numbers. He said, "I need 48 hours to have the injunction documents prepared properly. Can you keep things stable until then?" "I can keep things stable indefinitely," I said. The next 2 days were something I can only describe as an extended and extremely detailed form of patience. I lived in the house as Lucas, sleeping in the basement room, eating what was available, which was not much, and maintaining the careful performance of a man who was cooperating, while quietly making absolutely certain that every action taken in that house was being recorded, witnessed, or documented. Isabelle watched me very carefully. She knew something had changed, but she could not locate the fault line precisely. She had built her management of Lucas on the certainty of his passivity, and passivity that fails to behave like passivity creates a particular kind of cognitive dissonance that is very hard for controlling people to resolve. She kept finding reasons to be in the same room as me. She asked me about the workshop twice in one afternoon, questions that were really questions about what I knew and how much. I answered them simply and without effect, confirming enough to suggest I was still manageable while giving nothing. Thierry was subdued. He spent most of the first day on his phone in the upstairs office with the door closed. I could hear the murmur of conversations that were happening fast and in urgent registers. He was dealing with Auster, I assumed. He was trying to find the structural vulnerabilities in their position before the paperwork arrived. He was too late, but he did not know that yet. Celeste had not spoken to her husband since the morning I mentioned Portugal. She moved through the house with the dazed expression of someone whose interior architecture has been subjected to an unexpected load-bearing assessment and failed. She sat at the kitchen table for long periods, staring at things that were not there. On the second afternoon, she came to the workshop doorway while I was working on the armchair webbing, and stood there for several minutes before speaking. "Was it true," she asked, "what you said about Portugal?" I kept working on the webbing, threading the jute through the chair frame in the double herringbone pattern that Lucas preferred for period pieces. "It is true," I said. "How do you know?" "I heard him tell your mother," I said, "several months ago. I was in the basement. The door was not quite closed. I heard everything." This was a partial truth constructed from what I knew and what I could reasonably infer. Lucas had mentioned that the basement was below the living room and that sound traveled poorly but not impossibly through the old floor. I was confident enough in the substance of the claim. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He asked me to sign something last month. He said it was a beneficiary update for an insurance policy. He said it was administrative. What did you sign? She described it. It was a power of attorney. Yes, I said carefully. I would speak to a lawyer about that. She nodded slowly. She looked at my damaged hand. What happened to your fingers? A door, I said. She looked away. She said very quietly, I'm sorry for all of it. I know it is not enough to say it. I looked at her. She was genuinely sorry, I thought. She was young and she had made catastrophic choices, and she had been partly shaped into those choices by a mother who used people and a husband who had studied her precisely for exploitability. This did not absolve her, but it was real. Talk to a lawyer, I said. This week. A good one your mother does not know. She left. On the morning of the third day, Henri's lawyer arrived. Her name was Marie-Claire Dumont, and she was 44 years old and had the specific quality of absolute professional confidence that belongs to people who have spent 20 years winning cases that everyone else said could not be won. She arrived at the front door with a briefcase and a manner that suggested she considered every room she entered to be already hers. I showed her into the sitting room. I put the recorded files on the table, the camera button device, the prepaid phone with the text messages from Lucas's apprentice, the photographs of the documents. She went through everything with the methodical speed of a person who does not need things explained twice. When she was finished, she looked up at me and said, You are not Lucas Brenner. Not Lucas. No, I said. She considered this. For the purposes of this conversation and the documents I'm about to file, that distinction is not important. The evidence is what it is, regardless of who collected it. She looked at the photographs of the transfer deed. This is criminal fraud, not a civil matter. Criminal. She looked at the recording. This is not directly admissible, but it will inform the investigative direction significantly. She looked at me. Thierry Lemaire does not know I am here. He knows something is coming, I said. He does not know the specific form. Good. I need you to stay in the house today. I need things to remain stable while the injunction is filed. She looked at her watch. The registration office opens in 40 minutes. By 11 o'clock, there will be a legal hold on all transfers related to this property. After that, the sequence is established and your brother's position is secured. She left. I went back to the workshop and finished the armchair. At 11:15 that morning, Thierry came downstairs with his phone in his hand and his face the color of old plaster. He had a missed call from Moreau. He had a missed call from Oster. He had an email from the property registry. He stood in the workshop doorway and looked at me. I was sitting on the stool beside the workbench. I had a cup of tea. I looked back at him. It is done, I said. There is an injunction. The transfer is frozen pending a fraud investigation. The Financial Crimes Unit has received a referral. Your notary will be receiving a visit tomorrow morning. He held the phone in both hands, looking at the screen. His face was doing something complicated and private. You came here, he said, and his voice was very careful, very controlled, the last layer of control, the kind that only holds for a short time. You came here, and you did all of this for one man, for a furniture restorer. For nothing. Not for nothing, I said, for my brother. He was quiet. You cannot understand that, can you? I said. Not really. I do not say that as an insult. I say it as a factual observation. People who see other people as instruments do not understand why anyone would treat a person as the point of the exercise rather than the means to it. It is a genuine incapacity, not a moral failure exactly. It is more like a form of blindness. He looked at me for a long time. Then he put his phone in his pocket and walked upstairs without saying anything else. 3 days later, Lucas came back. I had spoken to him each evening at 8 o'clock on the prepaid phone, telling him what had happened that day and listening to his voice change incrementally and then dramatically. As the 10 days in Annecy and the daily meals and the sleep and the slow restoration of the physical certainty that he existed in a body with some claim to decent treatment did their work on him. He arrived at the front door in the mid-afternoon. I heard the knock and opened it. He was wearing clean clothes, and he had shaved, and he had some color in his face that had not been there when I had last seen him. He looked at me at the clothes I was wearing at the house behind me, and some expression moved across his face that I cannot name accurately. It was too large and too specific to have a single word attached to it. Come in, I said. He came in. He stood in the hallway of his own house and looked around at it. The kitchen door was open. The sitting room was off to the right. The workshop entrance was ahead. Where are they? He asked. Thierry has been staying at a hotel since yesterday, I said. Isabel is in her room. Celeste left this morning. She has retained her own lawyer. He nodded slowly. The injunction, I said. The fraud investigation. Your property is secure. The transfer has been unwound. Marie Claire is preparing the civil suit for damages and the criminal referral for the broken fingers. She is confident. I looked at his hand, which had been properly splinted now by a doctor in Annecy. How is it? Better, he said. He flexed his fingers carefully. Still hurts, but better. We went into the workshop. He looked at the Biedermeier desk, the repaired drawer fitting cleanly in its runners, invisible from 5 feet away. He walked over and opened and closed the drawer twice. You used hide glue, he said. Of course. You matched the grain direction on the new piece. I tried to. He put his hand flat on the desktop and looked at it. Then he went to the armoire and examined the veneer repair, running his thumb along the joint. He went to the armchair and looked at the webbing. He was quiet for a long time, moving through the space, checking everything with the hands of a man for whom the work was a language more precise than any other. Then he turned around and looked at me. You did good work, he said. You taught me, I said. This was not entirely true. He had shown me the basics of furniture restoration during one long summer when we were both 23, and I had learned enough to be competent under supervision, but not nearly enough to do what I had done in those 2 days without the muscle memory of his practice guiding my hands in some way I could not entirely explain. He knew this, and he smiled and did not argue with it. We went back to the kitchen. I made coffee, a proper coffee. Not the espresso of the house's occupation, but a filter coffee, the way our father used to make it, slow and attentive. We sat at the kitchen table and drank it without talking for a while. What happens now? Lucas said finally. The lawyer handles the legal elements, I said. The civil suit will take time. The criminal investigation will take longer. What happens to the house and the workshop and the land is a matter for you and Marie Claire and probably several months of negotiations. The land value is significant. You should not accept anything less than the full $4 million if and when you choose to sell. And you should only sell if it is actually what you want. He nodded. He looked at the coffee cup. And Isabel, he said. The name sat in the air between us for a moment. She was complicit, I said, fully and knowingly. What you do with that is your decision. He looked at the window. The Presqu'île was going about its afternoon outside, the light falling slant across old stone. A delivery cyclist went past on the street below. 22 years, he said. He said it simply without self-pity as a statement of fact, the length of time it takes for something that begins as a relationship to become something else entirely, through processes that are too slow to see while they are happening. I did not say anything. He said, Do you know what I thought about in Annecy? What? He looked at me. That summer when we were 19, Papa took us to the Tyrol for 2 weeks. We stayed in that terrible pension above the bakery, and we hiked every day, and at night we argued about everything. Philosophy, football, what we were going to do with ourselves. I remember I said, I thought about that a lot, he said, about who I was then, about how clearly I knew what I wanted and what I thought. He paused. I want to find my way back to that person. I do not know if I can, but I want to try. You can, I said. How do you know? Because I spent 2 days in your workshop, I said. And the work you do is the work of someone who still knows exactly what they are doing and exactly why they are doing it. It does not happen by accident. That is a person who has been trying to keep hold of themselves for a very long time, against considerable opposition and succeeding even when they could not feel it. He looked at me for a moment, then he looked at his hands, the damaged one and the good one. Isabel came downstairs at 4 o'clock. She walked into the kitchen and stopped when she saw Lucas sitting at the table. Her face underwent a series of rapid adjustments, all of them visible, none of them adequate to the situation. She looked at me standing at the counter, and she looked at Lucas sitting with his coffee. And she looked between us with the expression of a person who has run a complex equation twice and arrived at an answer she cannot accept but cannot refute. Lucas, she said. Her voice was very careful. He looked at her. He didn't lean away. He didn't tilt his head to the left in the old habit of bracing for impact. He sat straight. I would like you to have your things moved out by Friday, he said. She opened her mouth and then closed it. She looked at me. Do not look at him, Lucas said. I'm speaking to you. She looked back at him. Her face was changing, the severe architecture softening into something raw and more frightened that I suspected had not been visible since a very long time ago. She said, Lucas. Friday, he said. She stood very still for another moment. Then she walked out of the kitchen. We heard her footsteps on the stairs, slow and heavy, and nothing like the decisive footsteps she normally used. We sat in silence for a while. Then Lucas said, Are you staying? For a few days, I said, if that is all right. He nodded. He stood up and took his coffee cup to the counter and washed it in the sink standing at the window. Looking out at the narrow street, the limestone walls, the evening beginning to gather in the blue air above the city. He stood like a man in his own house. He stood like a man. That is where I would like to leave the story for the record at that moment. At my brother standing at the kitchen window of the house he had built his life in, making the small and entirely ordinary gesture of washing his own coffee cup in the house he owned, with the evening coming on and the city alive around him, and the years of diminishment finally slowly. In the particular way that justice is not instantaneous, but accumulates in the right direction when enough things have been correctly applied to the correct problem beginning to lift. But you will want the postscript, of course. People always want the postscript. Thierry Lemaire was charged 8 months later with property fraud, document falsification, and complicity in grievous bodily harm. Gregoire Oster, his partner, cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge and provided testimony that made the case against Thierry substantially stronger. The notary, a man named Philippe Renaud, who had been practicing in Lyon for 16 years, was struck off. He will not be practicing again. Thierry was convicted and sentenced to 3 years imprisonment, of which he served 20 months. He did not go to Portugal. He went to a correctional facility outside Marseille. I understand the weather there is not quite what he had in mind. Isabelle's involvement was addressed in the civil proceedings. She was not criminally charged, a decision that Lucas made with some deliberation, and which I think was ultimately correct. Not because she was innocent, but because the criminal process would have required Lucas's sustained engagement with the worst period of his life, at a time when what he needed most was to be released from it, rather than drawn back. She was required by the civil judgment to repay the funds she had diverted from the household accounts over the previous 3 years, a figure that the forensic accountant appointed by Marie Claire established at 147,000 euros. She moved to a smaller apartment in the Croix-Rousse district. I'm told she works part-time in a gallery, which seems appropriate, and that she has in fact become somewhat less severe over time, which I choose to believe but cannot verify. Celeste divorced Thierry. Her own lawyer, it turned out, was very good. She made a claim against the assets in a way that left Thierry very little from the development proceeds that had not yet been frozen, which was not much. She was not innocent in what happened to Lucas, but she had been younger and more manipulable than her mother, and she had been, in her own way, a victim of the same architecture of control. She made a point of apologizing to Lucas directly in a letter that took her apparently 4 drafts to get right, and that Lucas showed to me one evening without comment. I read it. It was a genuinely difficult thing to write honestly, and she had written it honestly. He kept it. The workshop land. This is the part of the story that people tend to respond to most. The development went ahead with a modified footprint that required a 2-year delay and a significant redesign. Moreau's firm eventually made a direct approach to Lucas for the land parcel at a negotiated value. Marie Claire handled the negotiation with the focused tenacity of a person who genuinely enjoys the work of taking money from people who have not handled money correctly. The final settled figure was 3,950,000 euros. After taxes, after legal fees, after the civil settlement, Lucas had a life-changing sum of money in an account that bore only his name. He did not renovate the house. He did not buy anything expensive. He hired an assistant for the workshop, a young woman named Petra from Czechia, who turned out to have a genuine talent for restoration work, and who Lucas describes as the best apprentice he has ever had. He had the basement room converted back into the storage space it had been before he was put in it. He had a proper kitchen installed. He bought good tools, the best available, because good tools are not an indulgence in skilled work. They are a form of respect for the craft. He traveled, not extravagantly. He went to the places he had always meant to go, the cabinet-making tradition in Denmark, the lacquer workshops in Bavaria, the old furniture districts in Vienna that we had talked about visiting together when we were boys. He sent me photographs. I have them saved. In every one. He's looking at something with the full attention of a person who is genuinely present in the moment they are occupying. He looks like himself. He looks exactly like the person he was before someone decided to make a project of erasing him. I drove back to Salzburg on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after arriving in Lyon. The Brenner Pass was clear and bright, the mountains in their full autumn color, the light that comes off Alpine stone in October that is like no other light in the world. I drove with the windows down for the last hour, the cold air coming in from the hillsides. I'm sitting at the kitchen table in the farmhouse now, writing this with a glass of Austrian Gruner Veltliner, and the last of the evening coming through the window. The mountains are blue in the distance. The spruce trees are still. My phone is on the table, and it buzzes occasionally with messages from Lucas. Ordinary messages. The kind of messages that people exchange when they have nothing urgent to communicate and are in contact simply because contact is pleasant. A photograph of a dovetail joint he is particularly pleased with. A question about which museum in Copenhagen I thought was worth the entry fee. An observation about a piece he saw at an auction that he thinks might be a misattributed Restoration period piece from a provincial English workshop. A theory that I am in no position to evaluate, but that I am entirely certain he is right about. I have been asked whether I would do it again. Yes, I would do it faster. I would have gone earlier. That is the thing I think about most, if I'm being honest with you. The years I spent not knowing or knowing and not asking the right questions, or asking the questions and accepting answers that I should have examined more carefully. The years during which my brother was, as he said, trying to find his way back to himself, and I was not paying sufficient attention to understand that this meant he was lost. The world contains people who look at other people and see instruments. They see resources. They see vulnerabilities arranged in particular configurations that can be mapped and then exploited methodically until the person in question has been reduced to something that confirms their original assessment. These people are not rare. They are not monsters in any dramatic sense. They are often charming and often reasonable seeming and often quite successful, right up until the moment they encounter something they did not account for in their map of the situation. The thing they most reliably fail to account for is the person who loves the person they are destroying. Not sentimental love, not the kind that writes letters and worries from a distance, the operational kind. The kind that travels overnight and goes in through the side door and sits at the kitchen table in the dark and waits and watches and collects everything it needs, and then when the moment is correct, does what is necessary. My brother is a gentleman. He makes beautiful things from broken material. He tilts his head to the left when he is thinking. He makes the best coffee of anyone I've ever known. He deserved a life that was worthy of him. I went and got it back. That is the whole story. That is all it ever was. I raise my glass to the evening and the mountains and the years still remaining, and I drink. The wine is excellent. The night is quiet. My phone buzzes once more on the table. It is a photograph from Lucas. He is standing in a workshop in Copenhagen, a craftsman's space with old timber walls and good northern light. He is holding a hand plane and looking at the camera with an expression that I have not seen on his face for a very long time. It is a simple expression. It is the expression of a man who is doing the thing he was made to do, in a place where no one is trying to take it from him, with the particular private satisfaction of a person who knows exactly who they are. Under the photograph, he has written 4 words. It is good here. I write back 2 words. Stay there, brother. The mountains are dark now, and the stars are coming out above them, and I sit here in the quiet house, and I feel as I have not felt for a long time that things are precisely as they should be. Not perfect. Correct. There is a difference. Perfect is a fantasy. Correct is something you achieve through action, through showing up, through the willingness to go in through the side door at 5 in the morning and sit at the kitchen table of a ruined house and wait for the machinery of justice to build itself from the materials you have gathered piece by piece, the way a good craftsman builds anything worth building with patience and skill and the absolute certainty that the work is worth doing. My name is Nikolai Brenner. I'm 64 years old. My brother is free. That is enough. That will always be enough.